from the things that I've seen, I'm pretty darn confident that on the balance of benefits, New Zealand is going to do a lot better if they sign the free trade agreement with the United States than if they don't.
Would you have the numbers to actually pass the enabling legislation that you might need for a TPP if you didn't have Labor?
Yes, I believe so, yeah.
So Peter Dunn, is he giving you...
Well, he's always historically voted for free trade agreements.
Prime Minister, there's also reports that Australia's leading push against or allowing the TPP to have restrictions on state-owned enterprises in a bid to sort of combat the influence of China in the region. Do you also see the TPP as a way of restricting China's influence in this region?
Well, for a start off, China's not a member of the TPP negotiating countries. So whether you alter something for TPP, depending on your MFN provisions, doesn't really make any difference actually to what's going on when it comes to China. The second point I make is that we're in the process of these negotiations now and taking place in Maui. So the ministerial meeting's going to take place Wednesday New Zealand time. We don't know what all of those final negotiations look like. But there's give and take both ways on this thing. So yep, people will be wanting to push back in certain areas and we'll have to give something as well. That's the nature of any negotiation. Nothing I've seen so far when it comes to SOEs has been of concern to me in terms of the initial reporting back from our mandating team.
One thing the Japanese finance minister said about 10 days ago was that if Canada and New Zealand continue to insist on access to Japanese dairy markets, that they could be invited to leave the TPP negotiations.
Canada could be, and New Zealand could be invited to
countries which insisted on holding out for quid pro quos in Asian farm markets could be invited to leave the negotiations. The question I wanted to put was, is access to those markets a sine qua non for New Zealand?
Well, the discussions I've had with the Japanese have been the opposite to that. For a start off, Prime Minister Abe in the discussions I've had with him has been very supportive of this being a high quality deal. The United States are the ones along with New Zealand who've been saying this has got to be a comprehensive deal. Actually, Prime Minister Abe is the one that's been saying he needs to shoot all of the arrows in his quiver, and one of those is certainly liberalisation of the Japanese economy. We've made some progress in terms of the agreements we already have with Japan as part of our negotiations and with the United States and Canada and others in TPP. What we're now pushing for is to try and get an even better deal. But no one's talking about walking away. Everyone can see the real benefits of doing this deal. There's always a bit of give and take, and there are always domestic sensitivities, and Japan has those domestic sensitivities.
This guy was talking about inviting New Zealand and Canada to walk away. So that was the question. Was it seemed so out of kilter with the general statements we've been hearing?
Yeah.
Whether you see this as purely an eve of negotiations ploy.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I've never seen any suggestion of that, and I'd be very surprised if that was to take place. I mean, we have, this has been an ongoing negotiation, and it's iteration upon iteration over a successive number of years. Even the deal as I last saw it, I think is looking and shaping up quite well. It's not perfect, as I said to you a while ago. It didn't achieve as much as I would have liked in dairy. In other areas it was pretty good. But no one's suggesting that, I don't think seriously, that New Zealand shouldn't be part of TPP.
On Auckland housing, there's been new modelling from the Auckland unitary plan process,
Yep.
which says that, given the existing rules, only about a quarter of the new houses that need to be built would be built under the rules. You're focusing on supply as the solution in Auckland, but the modelling seems to be saying there's no way that you can actually keep up with the demand.
Okay, well, I don't think I've seen the same report that you've seen, but what I would say is there is quite a bit of debate going on about Auckland's unitary plan and whether it will allow enough intensification to actually build the supply that's required. Everyone can, I think, more easily recognise and identify the greenfield sites. It's the intensification of the brownfield sites that's somewhat more of a debate. I'm actually optimistic over time we'll get there. I think there'll be some areas that will be easier to intensify than others. There'll be a degree of NIMBYism in certain parts of Auckland which will stand pretty strongly against intensification, but there are other parts where it's pretty openly welcomed. Certainly the whole CBD rail tunnel and the investment in the infrastructure there argues very strongly, for instance, for more intensification in downtown Auckland, which is far less controversial. Overall, I saw a report that was written for me by one of my officials this morning, which just gave a bit of an indication of the pipeline of activity, both the designation of sections and the building program, and it looked quite positive, I thought.
What hopes do you have for the debate later on, speaking to the Security Council on small island developing states?
Yeah, I think it's very useful because it was one of the big commitments that we made when we asked for the support of the small island developing countries, that we would be their voice at the Security Council. And so this is one of the first times I think they've actually had a legitimate sort of debate at the Security Council on some of the issues they face. And I think that probably ties into a certain degree with their views on things like climate change and other issues where they want an opportunity to have their views expressed. So I can't tell you how successful it'll be, but I think it'll be a useful and worthy debate at the Security Council.
Do you think the Council should make a definitive statement that climate change is a threat to security?
What's always really important, I think, is that you build as big a consensus as you can, and I'm not in a position, I haven't spoken to Ms McCulley about that, about whether you could actually get that sort of mandate and have it supported by certainly the P5. Some might not. I don't know yet. All I do know is I think we should use that position to advocate strongly for these small island developing states across a range of issues, clearly climate change being one of them.
Do you think climate change is a threat to security?
I think it could be. It depends on how you define security, of course. Their physical security is one particular issue at point. Certainly my views on climate change are well rehearsed now. I personally believe in anthropogenic climate change. I think it's occurring. The advice I get maybe even occurring at a slightly faster rate than some are modelled. I think we have to take it seriously, but it's just a question of making sure everybody does their bit.
I spoke to Jeffrey Palmer this morning. He said that some small island states face the prospect of disappearing. There's no greater threat to security than the disappearance of a sovereign state. Yeah,
and look, that case has been made. If you think about the Maldives, for instance, you'll remember going back to I think 2011, 10 maybe. They held a cabinet meeting underwater to demonstrate, physically, kind of threat. You can go to other places, the Kiribati, the Marshall Islands, very low-lying states where they are deeply worried about the impact of a significant rise in sea levels, and we acknowledge that. How you might resolve those issues is a question both of adaptation and mitigation, though, and there are a number of things you could do there.
Is one of the methods of adaptation perhaps allowing climate refugees?
Well, some time ago I was asked that question about what would happen to, say, Kiribati, for instance, if there was a significant issue. And as I said at the time, I think countries would do their bit to try and support a nation if they really were in that state. And I stand by that view. It's a long way down the track, but so I certainly won't be Prime Minister, and I don't know whether there'll be a national lead government, but I think other people would understand that position and look favourably on it.
Julie Bishop has travelled to New York in order to lobby Security Council members, including New Zealand, on setting up a tribunal. It's still not confirmed that it will be on the agenda during New Zealand's presidency. Do you see setting up a tribunal as a way of ensuring justice?
This is VMH 17, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So, the New Zealand's view is that there should be accountability, and we support a regime of accountability. What we're in the process of working through at the moment is what is the best possible outcome for achieving that, and that's the debate.
What are the different options?
Well, I think it depends on a number of factors. It's important that whatever the Security Council decides to progress, and us and the chair, if we progress that it can go all the way. In other words, that if it was decided that it would be a tribunal, that tribunal could actually be established under what terms. It's not, from New Zealand's point of view, a question of whether there should be accountability. There should be, but how do we make sure that can ultimately pass the support of the other Security Council members?
On dairying, there's some reports that a bank is starting to call in loans in South Canterbury. Has the government had any discussions with the banks to discourage them or talk to them about whether they should be pulling the plug here?
I haven't, so I just can't answer whether Bill English or Stephen Joyce have, but they certainly haven't reported to me that they have.
Serco's had $500,000 of its $1.2 million year. Do you expect them to get any of that bonus this year?
I don't know. I mean, what's happened today, essentially, you've seen is, Ray Smith, the Corrections Chief Executive, has made it clear the penalties, if you like, that they face for the June 30 year. So there's nothing unusual about what's happening today. It's just the bit that's, I suppose, unusual is only that he's publicly reported that rather than putting it on the online website. Look, in the end, the questions here will be better answered when we understand what's gone on. I think there's been plenty of allegations about what's taking place at Mount Eden Prison, and there's some evidence, clearly, fight clubs like they fit within that. The question is, how widespread are they, and should, has all the reporting been to the level required, and should they face bigger penalties, some potentially more extreme than just a financial fine? The answer there is I don't know that, but that's why we've got an inquiry, and also why there's been the step in provisions taken by the Chief Executive of Corrections on Friday.
Do you think it would be acceptable for them to receive a $1.2 million bonus this year?
Well, it all in the end comes down to their contract and whether they've fulfilled their contract. I've said on numerous occasions now I have very strong expectations of what I expect Serco to do. They have to honour their contract. So the government can't, or via the Ministry of Corrections, not make payments on its contract if they're legally due and if they've been legally fulfilled. The question is, have they fulfilled their obligations? And I'd be sort of speculating if I offered a view on that, because I simply don't know.
Just on this third-party report proposing some pretty significant overhauls of large parts of the governance of the health system.
Yeah.
Has that come unprompted?
Yeah. So my understanding is that as you quite correctly identified, it's a third-party report. I think as I understand, it was part of a wider report that the Chief Executive of Health actually requested. And so it was just one of the factors that they brought up. I don't think it's terribly likely that the government would be advancing it.
But it was noted in the Treasury document dump from the budget documents that the Ministry of Health itself and large swaths of the health system are facing major budget constraints. In the absence of any significant increases of money, the governance is going to change.
Yeah, I mean, I think I haven't seen the report, so I'm really working off the media reports I've seen. But firstly, it's not breaking news that there's financial challenges for the health system, because it is the area where notwithstanding we put in more money every single year, there's just new procedures and new prescriptions that, of course, New Zealanders would want, and we should be delivering for them as best we possibly can. So there's always pressure on the health system. Secondly, it's probably not new news that some people think that it should be a restructuring of health governance. The question you have to ask yourself would be, what would be gained from that, and how quickly could you implement that? And the answer is, history tells you reorganisation of the health system is a trickier issue than people think, and takes quite a long period of time. So just the anecdotal feedback I've had from the Minister, I don't think it's something they're actively looking to progress.
Given how unlikely you say it is to progress, are you concerned at all that the Ministry of Health appears to be consulting with board chief executives and chairs on this without the Minister's knowledge?
Well, I suspect that they're just trying to make sure that when they have a discussion with the Minister, because this was a leaked report and it's coming out earlier, that it's not unreasonable to say that, given having commissioned the report, which is, as I say, mine's quite wide-ranging, and this is one of the factors that the Chief Executive would want to be in a position to be able to say to the Minister, look, this is what the report says, and this is the sort of feedback you get if you try to advance it. It's just part of
I would also
the
see that the Director General of Health apparently making a bit of a power grab, suggesting that he should have powers which the State Services Commission currently has, and a much less democratic approach to the DHB elections.
Well, there's, given we are the funder and the Director General effectively via his ministry, is the majority funder, if not the sole funder probably, for the DHBs, you can understand why they might think it's a good idea to have more control and more influence. That doesn't mean that's something the government's going to follow.
Prime Minister, since Macaulay met with Prime Minister Wanga from Nauru, hasn't really been any signs that they've actually gotten any better. Would you consider using the UN Security Council debate on the Pacific Islands to bring this to attention and call them to account?
Well, the Minister hasn't raised it with me, you just need to take it up with him, in fact, and his office, but you can answer that, but I don't have any update on that. Okay.